The Berlin Sports Palace, or Sportpalast, was where Joseph Goebbels delivered his infamous Total War speech in February 1943. This massive arena could hold 14,000 people and became the epicenter of Nazi propaganda rallies. The building featured a distinctive arched roof and tiered seating that amplified the fervor of Nazi gatherings. After the war, the structure survived the Battle of Berlin, but was demolished in 1973. Today, the site is occupied by the Social Palace apartment complex in the Schöneberg district. Nothing remains of the building where some of history's most chilling speeches echoed through the crowds. High in the Bavarian Alps stood Hitler's Berghof, his beloved mountain retreat where he spent more time than anywhere else during the war. The complex featured a massive picture window that could be lowered into the floor, revealing panoramic views of the Alps. This was where Hitler planned invasions, hosted foreign dignitaries, and made decisions that affected millions of lives. In the final days of the war, the RAF bombed the Berghof on April 25, 1945. The Bavarian government demolished what remained in 1952 to prevent it from becoming a neo-Nazi shrine. Today, only the retaining walls and some foundation stones remain, hidden in the forest. Albert Speer's architectural masterpiece, the New Reich Chancellery, stretched over 400 meters through the heart of Berlin. Its marble gallery was twice the length of Versailles' Hall of Mirrors, designed to intimidate visiting dignitaries. This was Hitler's official residence and workplace, featuring his massive study where he met with generals and foreign leaders. The building was severely damaged during the Battle of Berlin in 1945. The Soviets systematically dismantled what remained, using the marble to build their war memorials. By 1949, nothing stood but rubble. The site is now covered by apartment blocks and a parking lot near Vossstrasse. In Pingfang, near Harbin, China, stood one of history's most horrific facilities. The Unit 731 complex covered 6 square kilometers and housed Japan's biological warfare research program. Here, thousands of prisoners were subjected to unimaginable experiments. The facility included laboratories, prison blocks, crematoria, and testing grounds. As Soviet forces approached in August 1945, the Japanese destroyed most of the complex with explosives and fire, attempting to erase evidence of their crimes. While a small museum now occupies part of the site, the vast majority of the original buildings were obliterated. Only scattered ruins and foundations hint at the massive scale of the original complex. At Prince Albrechtstrasse, 8 in Berlin, stood the administrative heart of Nazi terror, the Gestapo headquarters. This former art school became the command center for Nazi Germany's secret police. Below the building were cells where prisoners were interrogated and tortured. The building was heavily damaged by Allied bombing in 1945 and further demolished during the Battle of Berlin. In the 1950s and 1960s, East German authorities completely leveled what remained. For decades, the site was a vacant lot and parking area along the Berlin Wall. Today, the Topography of Terror Documentation Center stands on the grounds, with only some basement cells preserved beneath. On December 7, 1941, Battleship Row presented a neat line of America's Pacific Fleet moored along Ford Island. The USS Arizona, Oklahoma, West Virginia, California, Nevada, Tennessee, Maryland, and Pennsylvania represented American naval might. Within 2 hours, this formation was shattered. While the harbor remains a naval base, the scene of that morning has completely disappeared. The USS Arizona rests as a memorial beneath the water. The other battleships were either scrapped, sunk as targets, or transformed beyond recognition. The wooden piers and moorings of Battleship Row were replaced with modern facilities, Only the memorial and oil still leaking from Arizona's hull connect us to that Sunday morning. The Warsaw Ghetto, established in 1940, imprisoned over 400,000 Jews in a 3.4-square-kilometer area. The ghetto was sealed with brick walls topped with barbed wire and broken glass. Wooden bridges connected sections divided by Aryan streets. After the 1943 uprising, the Nazis systematically destroyed the ghetto, building by building. SS General Jürgen Stroop's forces used flamethrowers and explosives to raze entire blocks. By the war's end, approximately 85% of Warsaw lay in ruins. Post-war reconstruction created entirely new neighborhoods over the ghetto site. A few pre-war buildings survive, but the maze of streets, walls and structures that defined the ghetto has vanished. Modern apartment blocks now stand where hundreds of thousands suffered. Canada was the prisoner's name for the warehouses at Auschwitz-Birkenau, where victims' belongings were sorted, named for the country that symbolized wealth and abundance. These 30 barracks stored mountains of confiscated luggage, clothing, shoes, eyeglasses, and personal items. Photographs from after liberation show rooms filled floor to ceiling with human hair, prosthetic limbs, and children's toys. In January 1945, as Soviet forces approached, the SS burned most of these warehouses to destroy evidence. Only a handful of the storage barracks survived. The vast majority were consumed by flames, taking with them the last physical connections to hundreds of thousands of victims. What remains today is a fraction of the original complex. Hitler's Atlantic Wall stretched from Norway to Spain, over 2,400 kilometers of coastal fortifications. The system included bunkers, gun emplacements, obstacles, and minefields, requiring millions of tons of concrete and steel. Thousands of these structures still dot European coastlines, but many have disappeared completely. Coastal erosion has claimed countless bunkers, pulling them into the sea. Others were demolished for coastal development or saw blown up as hazards. In Normandy, many bunkers visible on D-Day beaches were dismantled in post-war reconstruction. Some became buried under sand dunes or were absorbed into new construction. The continuous wall that once represented Nazi paranoia now exists only in scattered fragments. The Shitamachi, Tokyo's Low City, was a densely packed neighborhood of wooden houses, small shops, and traditional buildings. Home to working-class families and artisans, this area represented old Tokyo's heart. On the night of March 9th, 1945, Operation Meeting House devastated the district. American B-29S dropped nearly 1,700 tons of incendiary bombs, creating firestorms that killed approximately 100,000 people. The wooden buildings burned so completely that entire neighborhoods were reduced to ash. Post-war reconstruction replaced Shitamachi with modern concrete structures. The intricate maze of narrow streets, traditional architecture, and centuries-old neighborhoods vanished in a single night. Today's Sumida and Koto wards bear almost no resemblance to pre-war Shitamachi. Beneath the Reich Chancellery Garden lay the Führerbunker, Hitler's final headquarters. This two-level underground complex included 18 rooms where Hitler spent his last days and ultimately took his life on April 30th, 1945. The bunker featured thick concrete walls, diesel generators, and a ventilation system. After the war, the Soviets filled the upper level with rubble. In 1947, they demolished the emergency exit and sealed the structure. East Germany further buried the site during construction projects in the 1980s. In 1988 to 89, during subway construction, workers discovered and demolished what remained of the bunker. Today, a parking lot and apartment complex cover the location, with a small information board the only marker of history's end for the Third Reich. The old Ford Motor Factory at Bukit Timah was where Lieutenant General Arthur Percival surrendered Singapore to Japanese forces on February 15, 1942. This assembly plant became the site of Britain's largest military surrender in history, with 80,000 Allied troops becoming prisoners. The factory, with its distinctive Art Deco styling, continued operations under Japanese occupation. After the war, Ford resumed automobile assembly until 1980. The original building was slated for demolition, but was saved and converted into a memorial exhibition centre. However, the surrounding industrial complex, the assembly lines, workers' facilities, and warehouses that made up the working factory has completely disappeared, replaced by modern development. Only the small main building survives as a museum. The Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen became famous when American forces captured it intact on March 7, 1945, providing the Allies their first bridgehead across the Rhine. This railway bridge, built during World War I, featured distinctive stone towers at each end. For 10 days it stood as the only bridge across the Rhine, allowing thousands of troops and vehicles to cross. German forces desperately tried to destroy it with artillery, commandos, and even V-2 rockets. On March 17, 1945, weakened by bombing damage and constant traffic, the bridge collapsed, killing 28 American engineers. The US Army decided not to rebuild it. The towers on both banks remain as museums, but the bridge itself, that critical span that shortened the war, vanished into the Rhine within days of its capture. Dresden's Frauenkirche, with its magnificent Baroque dome, dominated the city's skyline for 2 centuries. The church's stone bell dome was an architectural masterpiece visible from miles away. On February 13, 1945, Allied firebombing raids devastated Dresden. The Frauenkirche initially survived the bombing, but the intense heat from the firestorm caused its sandstone pillars to crack. On February 15th, the dome collapsed inward, leaving only the altar and outer walls. For 45 years, East Germany left the ruins as a war memorial. The church was finally rebuilt using original stones and completed in 2005. While today's Frauenkirche looks identical to the original, the 18th century structure itself, its ancient stones weathered by centuries, is gone, replaced by a modern reconstruction. Ploiești, Romania, housed the third largest oil production capacity in Europe and supplied 1/3 of Germany's fuel. The complex included massive refineries, storage tanks, and processing facilities sprawling across the region. The refineries were so crucial that the Allies launched Operation Tidal Wave in August 1943, one of the war's most daring bombing raids. Despite heavy losses, 54 aircraft destroyed, subsequent raids continued until August 1944. By war's end, Ploiești's refineries were largely destroyed. Post-war reconstruction by Communist Romania completely reorganized the facilities for war with Soviet-style industrial architecture. The distinctive pre-war refineries with their Art Deco administration buildings and original German design processing units were replaced entirely. Today's Ploiești petrochemical complex bears no resemblance to the facilities that fueled the Wehrmacht. Founded in 529 AD, the Monte Cassino Abbey stood as one of Christianity's most important monasteries, perched atop a mountain overlooking the Liri Valley. The complex contained priceless frescoes, ancient manuscripts, and art accumulated over 1,400 years. In February 1944, believing Germans were using it as an observation post, Allied forces bombed the monastery, reducing it to rubble. Over 230 tons of bombs destroyed everything except some outer walls. 4 months of brutal fighting completed the destruction. The ancient abbey, the birthplace of the Benedictine order, was obliterated. Post-war reconstruction began in 1948, following the original floor plan, but using entirely modern materials and techniques. Today's abbey looks similar externally, but Justinian's original monastery, along with its irreplaceable medieval interiors and centuries of accumulated art, disappeared in a single afternoon of bombing. Pre-war Stalingrad was a thriving industrial city on the Volga River, featuring grand squares, theatres, department stores and tree-lined boulevards. The city centre showcased Stalin-era architecture with its distinctive style of Soviet classicism. From August 1942 to February 1943, the Battle of Stalingrad reduced the city to moonscape. Fighting occurred in every building, basement and sewer. The city centre became unrecognisable rubble. After the German surrender, virtually nothing stood above ground level. Soviet reconstruction created an entirely new city on the ruins, with wider streets, massive squares, and heroic architecture celebrating the victory. The street layout itself was changed. Today's Volgograd, renamed in 1961, preserves almost nothing of pre-war Stalingrad's physical structure. The city that existed before the battle exists only in photographs. The Tirpitz, Nazi Germany's largest battleship, spent much of the war hiding in Kafjord, Norway. The Germans built elaborate facilities for the ship, concrete moorings, submarine nets, artificial smoke generators, and anti-aircraft positions. The surrounding mountains provided natural protection, enhanced by artificial camouflage. The British launched multiple attacks, including X-craft midget submarines and Lancaster bomber raids, to sink the Lonely Queen of the North. After the successful bombing in November 1944 that sank Tirpitz near Tromsø, the Kafjord facilities became obsolete. Post-war, the Norwegian government removed the military installations. The concrete moorings were broken up, the defensive positions dismantled, and the submarine nets salvaged. Today, Kafjord is a quiet fishing village with a small museum. The vast military installation that once protected Germany's most powerful warship has completely vanished. Coventry Cathedral, built between 1373 and 1460, represented one of England's finest examples of perpendicular Gothic architecture. Its soaring nave and magnificent stained glass made it a landmark of medieval craftsmanship. On November 14, 1940, the Luftwaffe launched Operation Mondscheinsonate, Moonlight Sonata, dropping hundreds of incendiary bombs on Coventry. The cathedral was engulfed in flames. By morning, only the outer walls and spire remained standing. The medieval roof, the wooden interior, and priceless stained glass were destroyed. In a controversial decision, the ruins were preserved rather than rebuilt. A modern cathedral was constructed adjacent to the ruins in 1962. The original medieval cathedral, its wooden pews, its screens, its centuries of history, absorbed into every stone, burned away in a single night. What stands today are architectural ghosts, walls without their soul. Ravensbrück, the largest concentration camp for women, held over 130,000 prisoners during the war. The camp included prisoner barracks, administration buildings, workshops, and a crematorium built in 1943 to handle the increasing death rate. Medical experiments, forced labor, and executions occurred daily. As Soviet forces approached in April 1945, the SS attempted to destroy evidence by blowing up the crematorium and gas chamber. Inmates were force-marched away or killed. After liberation, the Soviet occupation demolished many remaining buildings, The crematorium, which had consumed thousands of victims, was completely destroyed. East Germany turned the site into a memorial, but reconstructed much of it according to ideological preferences. The original camp structures, including the building where so many died, are gone. Today's memorial uses models and markers to indicate where buildings once stood. The Royal Opera House in Valletta, Malta, completed in 1866, was a jewel of neoclassical architecture. Its ornate interior featured Italian marble, gilded boxes, and a magnificent painted ceiling. The building served as Malta's cultural heart, hosting operas, plays, and social events. On April 7, 1942, during one of the countless Axis air raids on Malta, a direct bomb hit destroyed the Opera House. The entire interior collapsed, leaving only the facade and some walls standing. After the war, debate raged about reconstruction, but the ruins remained. Weather and neglect further degraded the structure. In 2013, the site was finally developed into an open-air venue, incorporating the surviving columns as architectural features. But the Opera House itself, its velvet seats, its acoustics, its Victorian splendor, disappeared in one explosion during Malta's darkest hours. The Möhne Dam, completed in 1913, held back the Möhne Reservoir in western Germany, supplying water to the Ruhr industrial region. This massive curved gravity dam stood 40 meters high and 650 meters long, an engineering marvel of Imperial Germany. On May 17, 1943, RAF Squadron 617's dam busters breached the dam using Barnes-Wallis's bouncing bombs. The resulting flood released 330 million tons of water, devastating the valley below and killing nearly 1,600 people. The dam's central section was completely destroyed, leaving a 77-meter-wide gap. By September 1943, German engineers had rebuilt the dam using forced labor. But the new structure was constructed differently, with a wider crown and reinforced design. The original Kaiserreich-era dam, with its distinctive construction and engineering, vanished in the flood. Today's dam is essentially a new structure on the old foundations. Before the war ended, Japan had begun ambitious construction on the Seikan Tunnel, intended to connect Honshu and Hokkaido beneath the Tsugaru Strait. The project employed thousands of laborers, including Korean forced workers, in dangerous conditions. The wartime construction site included worker barracks, excavation equipment, rail lines, and temporary structures along both coasts. When Japan surrendered in 1945, construction halted immediately. Equipment was abandoned and the facilities were dismantled or fell into disrepair. The project didn't resume until 1964, with entirely different technology and methods. The wartime construction camps, the primitive shim excavation sites, and all evidence of the 1940s work disappeared during the two-decade gap. When the tunnel finally opened in 1988, nothing remained of the original wartime attempt except some preliminary surveys. The forced laborers' camps exist only in memory. The Berchtesgaden train station was completely renovated and expanded during the Nazi era to handle the influx of officials, dignitaries, and supplies heading to Hitler's Berghof. The station featured special waiting rooms for VIPs, enhanced security facilities, and dedicated platforms. This was where Hitler arrived and departed, where Mussolini's train pulled in for his 1941 visit, and where countless Nazi leaders began their journeys to the mountain retreat. In the war's final days, Allied bombing damaged the station. French occupation forces demolished several Nazi-era additions. Post-war reconstruction created a modern station serving tourists rather than tyrants. The special VIP facilities, the security installations, and the distinctive Nazi architectural modifications were removed. Today's modest Berchtesgaden Hauptbahnhof retains none of the grandiose touches that once marked it as the gateway to Hitler's Alpine headquarters. Before the Battle of Midway in June 1942, the atoll hosted extensive American military installations, wooden barracks, hangars, fuel depots, command centers, and defensive positions. The Pan-American Airways facilities from the island's pre-war role as a trans-Pacific stopover were converted to military use. During the three-day battle, Japanese bombing raids damaged or destroyed many structures. Post-battle expansion completely reorganized the base. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, the Navy repeatedly rebuilt and expanded facilities. When the base closed in 1993, many buildings were demolished for environmental cleanup. The severe 2011 tsunami caused further destruction. Today, Midway is a wildlife refuge where birds nest in bunkers. The original 1942 installations, the buildings that witnessed the turning point of the Pacific War, are gone, replaced by layers of subsequent construction, then by abandonment and nature's reclamation. Heinrich Himmler transformed the 17th century Wewelsburg Castle into a ceremonial center for the SS, envisioning it as the Order's spiritual headquarters. The Nazis added the distinctive Obergruppenführer Saal, with its black sun mosaic, underground chambers, and elaborate Germanic symbols. Concentration camp prisoners from nearby Niederhagen performed the labor, many dying in the process. As American forces approached in March 1945, the SS attempted to destroy the castle with explosives and fire. They partially succeeded, gutting much of the interior, including many of Himmler's additions. Post-war reconstruction restored the castle's original Baroque appearance, deliberately removing most Nazi modifications. The underground chambers were sealed, ceremonial rooms were redesigned, and SS symbolism was removed or covered. The castle today serves as a museum and youth hostel, but Himmler's mystical SS sanctum, his Camelot for the SS Order, was largely obliterated by its own creators and subsequent renovations. Intramuros, the walled city within Manila, was the oldest district in the Philippines, filled with Spanish colonial churches, government buildings, and homes dating from the 16th century. The district represented 350 years of Spanish colonial architecture and Filipino heritage. During the Battle of Manila in February 1945, the Japanese military made Intramuros their final defensive position. American artillery and aerial bombardment, combined with Japanese scorched earth tactics, reduced the ancient district to rubble. Of 67 churches and stone buildings, only San Agustin Church survived intact. An estimated 100,000 civilians died in the battle. Post-war reconstruction created a modern district with only selective restoration of colonial structures. The narrow Spanish-era streets, most of the colonial houses, and centuries of architectural heritage vanished. Today's Intramuros is partially restored for tourism, but the authentic Spanish colonial city is gone forever. France's Maginot Line included massive underground fortresses, but each also had extensive surface installations, barracks, entrance buildings, observation posts, anti-tank obstacles, and rails for retractable gun turrets. These surface structures were designed to blend with the landscape, but were fully functional military installations. When Germany invaded in 1940, many positions saw combat. After France's surrender, the Germans occupied and studied the fortifications. Post-war, the French military continued using some positions, modifying and sometimes demolishing surface structures. Many fortresses were sold to private owners who removed buildings and obstacles. Decades of neglect, scrap metal salvage, and agricultural development eliminated most surface installations. Today, while the underground portions remain, the original surface infrastructure, the barracks, the entrance pavilions, the observation posts, has mostly disappeared. What's preserved represents a fraction of the line's original surface presence along the German border. Peenemünde on Germany's Baltic coast was where the V-2 rocket was developed and initially produced. The facility included massive assembly halls, test stands, wind tunnels, liquid oxygen plants, and housing for thousands of workers. This was the birthplace of space-age rocketry, where Wernher von Braun's team created the world's first ballistic missile. RAF Bomber Command attacked Peenemünde in August 1943, Operation Hydra, causing significant damage and forcing V-2 production underground to Mittelbau-Dora. After the war, advancing Soviet forces captured the site and systematically demolished the buildings to salvage equipment and prevent Allied use of the technology. By the 1950s, the production halls, the assembly buildings, and most test facilities were gone. Some test stands remain as ruins, and there's a museum, but the extensive infrastructure that produced Hitler's Vergeltungswaffe has been erased from the landscape. While Giorgio Bassani's novel The Garden of the Finzi-Continis was fiction, it represented real places, the gardens, estates, and community spaces of Italian Jewish families before the Holocaust. In cities like Ferrara, Rome, and Venice, Jewish communities had maintained properties, synagogues, schools, and cultural centers for centuries. The racial laws of 1938 began the isolation, but deportations from 1943 to 45 scattered and destroyed these communities. Properties were confiscated, families disappeared, and the physical spaces that defined Italian Jewish life were repurposed, sold, or demolished. After the war, returning survivors found their world gone. Gardens were subdivided, estates sold to new owners, community centers converted to other uses. The pre-war Italian Jewish world, not just the people but the physical spaces where they lived, gathered, and maintained their culture, largely disappeared. What remains are scattered buildings, but the lived spaces, the continuity, the community fabric is gone. 30 locations, 30 memories, 30 holes in the landscape where history once stood, and some were destroyed in moments by bombs, fire, or explosions. Others faded gradually through neglect, demolition, or deliberate erasure. These disappeared places remind us that history isn't just what happened, but where it happened. When we lose these locations, we lose tangible connections to the past. The question we must ask ourselves is, what are we preserving? What are we allowing to disappear? Some sites deserve destruction, symbols of oppression and evil. Others were casualties of war, urban development, or time's passage. But each erasure removes a piece of evidence, a place where we could stand and say, here, this happened here. World War II reshaped our planet's surface as profoundly as it reshaped human history. These 30 locations are just the beginning. Thousands more have vanished, taking their stories with them. We remember not to glorify war, but to ensure that forgetting these places doesn't lead to forgetting the lessons they taught us. The past may be gone, but as long as we remember these disappeared locations, their stories survive.